Hi friends, I hope everyone is doing well. Once again, I brought out my slow stitch art journal for today's Collage with Me video. As I've mentioned previously, I've promised myself to create more in this neglected art journal that I made back in 2020. I'll put links to the other videos using this art journal in the description area in case you're interested in taking a look. For this video though, we will be recreating this paper collage, but in fabric. We're not going to recreate it in the same colors. Instead, we'll use the layout of this original collage as the inspiration. We'll see how a clean line modern paper collage can be interpreted as a fabric collage. One more thing, both art journals are the same size, which is 4 inches by 6 inches. Not sure if that's important, but I thought I should mention it. Now let's go over the supplies we'll be using. First, let's talk about the fabric. I pulled these from a box that I keep fabric that I use exclusively for this journal. As I mentioned, instead of pulling colored fabrics that are exactly like the colored paper in this original collage, I pulled fabric that would represent dark, medium, and light values. I've pre-cut the fabric elements to save time, so let's go over them. We got this burgundy shape here, and that represents this original blue one. And then I pulled this terracotta and this dark gray, and that represents, the dark gray represents this orangey yellow, and the terracotta is the two greens here. Now the only element that I'm unsure about pulling the fabric is this red. So I pulled a light rust and a dark emerald green. So I'm not sure which one I want to use yet. I think we can decide this element near the end. We can audition the different colors to see which works best after the other fabric pieces are sewn down in the journal. So let me put this aside, go over the other supplies. Close that up. We have embroidery thread, and as usual, I'm not sure if I'm going to use all these threads, but I'd rather have them out and ready to use if needed. Got a sewing needle. And then I brought out wax this time. Waxing the thread will make it easier to hand stitch. Then I have pins to secure the fabric. And then I also brought out a glue stick, and I usually have this on hand. So when I'm sewing in a journal, sometimes the pieces are very small and it's easier to glue them down instead of pinning them down when I'm hand stitching. And the last supply is a pair of scissors. Now we're ready to start collaging the fabric. I brought you in closer so it's easier to see the stitching process. A few things though I want to go over before we start stitching. I've chosen this page to collage for two reasons. The first, that it's the next blank page in the journal. And second, it's one of the lightest colored fabric pages. A light ground is one of the elements of the original collage that I want to keep. Since watching me hand stitch all the fabric will make this video very long and possibly very boring, I will speed up and or remove some of the stitching process. I will at least show you some of the stitching of each piece of fabric so you can see how I stitched it into the journal. Oh, one more thing. This section will have a mixture of narration and music, so let's get started. I will be sewing down this burgundy piece first. It's the largest element in the collage because it goes from the top of the page down to the bottom. And since it reads dark, I don't want to use a thread that will distract from that, because if I use a thread too light, then it won't read as a dark element. I decided to use this medium rust thread. I think that will look good. And I'm just going to do a long stitch. Now the gray and the terracotta will be sewn next, and I decided to use this light blue for the gray, and I'm not sure how I'm going to stitch it down. We'll come back to that. And then the terracotta, I'm kind of going back and forth between this rust or this lighter rust. So I'm going to decide that later. So first, let's sew this down. I'm not going to use too long of a thread because I don't want it to get knotted, even though I am going to use wax. Sometimes that can happen. I just pass the thread a few times with the wax just to make sure it's coated nicely. And with the other pages in this journal, I leave some of the thread tails long. So I started off by just knotting the thread farther up, right about there. And I do probably 2 to 3 knots just to make sure it's secure. I also move my journal around when I'm hand stitching just to make it easier. So you'll notice that as well. I'm going to start stitching on the inner curve of this piece. One more supply that's helpful is a thimble. I forgot to bring it out initially. I didn't think about it until I started sewing this line down. So yes, hand stitching with a thimble really helps. Now that both sides of this piece are stitched down, I have to decide if I want to leave this middle area without any stitching, do 1 row of stitching, or maybe 2. And what I like to do is lay down my thread just so I can visually see what it will look like. That's with 1. And then with 2, I think it might even be too busy. Let me just straighten this up a bit. And that's with 2 rows of stitching. For my eye, I like simplicity, so I think I'm just going to do 1 more row of stitching right down the middle. The burgundy piece is now sewn down, and I'm glad I went with just the single piece in the center. It's not so cluttered. And you probably noticed too that my stitches aren't perfect. I think that's fine. I like when stitches are not perfect. It gives it character. So If you're intimidated by hand stitching, just know your stitches don't have to be perfect. The next piece we're going to sew down is the gray, and we're going to use this light blue thread. I like the look of what's going on in these random stitches inside these triangles. And we're going to do that the same for the gray piece and the two terracotta pieces. So I'm going to use the light blue with the gray, and I'm just going to continue using this rust color in the two terracottas. The gray is now sewn down, so I'm going to start working on the terracotta. And once again, I'm using the same thread as I use for the burgundy. And I'm going to do the same type of stitch as the gray and as I did with the triangles. All the pieces are sewn down except for the piece that will go in that area. And I like that the fabric is starting to fray. I really love that look. It really fits with this journal. So now what we're going to do is audition the pieces that will go in this area. So we have first the emerald green, and this piece reads as a dark value. So that does change the look of the collage. So we have dark, dark, light ground, and these are mid-tones. Now let's try the light rust. So we have the light rust, the light brown, the dark burgundy in this piece, and then the mid-tone here. Let me bring out the original collage again that we're using for inspiration. Maybe that will help us decide between the light or the dark color. Because the original has a pop of red, and that's a bold contrast between the cooler tone of the other elements in the original. I don't think I want to go that direction. I still think we should decide between a light and a dark color. Even though green is my favorite color, and I tend to use it a lot in this journal, I'm decided to go with the light rust. And the reason for that is I believe it will add contrast to this collage. We have this dark element here. We have mid-tone here. The ground is light. So I think this light piece will pop, similar to the original where it has the red pop of color. And what also helped me with my decision is looking at this adjoining collage. Look at the light rust here. I think it adds a nice element to this collage, and I think it'll do the same for this one. To keep this piece looking light, I'm going to use a light rust thread. I'm going to stitch it the same as these elements, and I think that'll allow this piece to still read as a light element. So I'm going to do that next, and then trim off the edges, and then we'll have one final review. Here is the finished collage. Let me bring out the original paper collage. We can just compare for a moment. I think we achieved creating a collage inspired by the original, but not completely replicating it. The fabric collage has dark, medium, and light color fabrics that makes it balanced. So in that respect, it's similar to the original. I'm glad that we used the light rust fabric instead of the emerald. Let me put this back and we'll talk more about this collage. I thought about hand stitching the ground, but I like that the slight variation of green is showing. Also, I like that the ground is still reading as a light value. As I mentioned when stitching the collage, I'm okay with uneven stitches. I think it gives character to the collage. In my opinion, there's a good balance of stitched and non-stitched areas. All in all, I'm happy with the way this collage turned out. It was fun to take a paper collage as inspiration for a fabric collage. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a bit of a challenge filming myself hand stitching. The more I do it, the more I hope I can produce hand stitching videos that are well made, informative, and inspiring. Please let me know if you have any questions. I appreciate you watching. Take care. Bye now.